Hello, I'm Mukhar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In today's first segment, we're going to discuss those election results coming out of the United Kingdom. It's no surprise, really, at some level, that Boris Johnson has kept his promise of winning the office of Prime Minister, as he was, of course, Prime Minister at this time. His party has won a resounding overall majority in this snap general election, being held, of course, in December after about 100 years or so in this month. Certainly, no politician wanted to be the one calling for this election, but as Johnson there said, as well as his party members, that they had no choice but to call for this election in order to have further clarity going into Brexit, the final stages of Brexit, that is, as well as other issues plaguing the UK at this time. What went wrong for Labour also seems to be the question on many people's minds this morning there in the UK. Was it about Jeremy Corbyn not being able to connect with the people? Was it about the manifesto, which was possibly too detailed and long for people to be able to connect with? Or was it just the fact that Labour did not have and does not currently have a good strategy vis-a-vis Brexit as well, considering these were called the Brexit elections, something that many people, again, have argued against, saying that there are a lot of other issues as well, as I said, plaguing Britain. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Linda Bazant, who is a barrister and Brexit consultant. She's joining us now from Surrey, UK. Also joining us from London is Patrick Sullivan, who is Chief Executive Officer of the leading UK think tank Parliament Street. And finally, joining us from Bristol in the UK is Bola Adatiran, who is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of the West of England. Bola, Patrick, and Linda, good morning to all three of you. Linda, let me start with you. What do you make of these election results? Polls had already predicted this, so not too much of a surprise, certainly.
Not too much of a surprise, but maybe a bigger majority than anyone was expecting leading up to the actual election. But what this actually does is it gives business a huge boost. With regard to the Labour Party's threat of nationalising rail, water, the mail system and so on, their shares have shot up this morning with the result of the Conservative victory. And also the fact that Boris has already been on and spoken about the people that would normally vote Labour that have given him their vote this time and thanked them for that, and have actually said that he is hoping to be able to do the best for everybody and not just the usual Conservative voters.
Patrick, as you know, Corbyn, as well as others in the Labour Party, have said the results went this way because the country is suffering from Brexit fatigue. I mean, I'm sure all of us can agree that we're all suffering from Brexit fatigue as well, speaking about this ever since that referendum was held a number of years ago. But is that really the reason here, or do you think Labour just messed up when it came to these elections?
I think what this is a corrected election. What happened in 2017 was that the Conservative Party allowed the media to portray this idea that they had it in the bag. As a result, when people were voting in that election, they weren't voting for who would be the best Prime Minister, but they were voting on who would be the best Member of Parliament. So you had some good constituency Labour MPs who were returned to Parliament because people thought there was no chance of Jeremy Corbyn ever becoming Prime Minister. As a result, Jeremy Corbyn did a lot better than he should have done, because if you remember in that election campaign, people were talking about the Conservatives getting a majority of sort of 150 or some such, quite similar to Tony Blair in 97. And that sort of mismanagement of the expectations game is what really worked in Corbyn's favour. This time round, what the Conservative Party did is it was laser focused on making sure that people knew that there was a real threat of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. Yeah. I know anecdotally, I've got a few friends who run small businesses, and they were absolutely terrified about this idea of Jeremy Corbyn coming in, nationalising business, scaring inward investment away from the UK. That turnout was, I think, was probably the largest it's been in probably about 50 years, I would say.
Okay, so Bola, what are your thoughts on that? Because certainly then one of the concerns that came out during the campaign was when Corbyn spoke about the fact that the NHS would at some level be privatized, right? It would be part of a trade deal, possibly with the United States as well. Is that an area of concern? Do you think Johnson may very well go ahead and do that, even though, of course, he's denied it? And then what do you make of the concerns on the part of businesses that, that Corbyn is and was seeking to nationalize a lot of things?
No, I quite agree with your last speaker that there is a sense in which a lot of people have been quite scared of the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn becoming the Prime Minister, and there has been a sense in which the Conservatives have also fed into some of those fears by pointing out some of the policies that Labour might initiate, which would run counter to many of the things that people are accustomed to. Particularly, for example, a couple of during the election campaign, we heard a lot about the Labour scrapping MI5, and we also had a lot of concerns ranging from the tax raise that Labour would be instituting. That was a concern to a lot of people. So there was a sense in which, yes, people were quite scared of Jeremy Corbyn's Prime Minister getting into number 10 Downing Street. But I think what was more important was the fact that Jeremy Corbyn himself failed disastrously, not only in terms of the fact that he failed to connect with voters, but also in terms of he failed to assuage the fears of voters and to understand exactly what people were looking for. There was a sense in which is deterring on Brexit was not helpful. The fact that he sat on the fence on Brexit was not helpful, and this has been a theme of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party for a long time. He has failed to commit himself to many things, and a lot of people have been very, very skeptical of his leadership. So it was no brainer for me at all. From the beginning of the elections, I had seen it coming that this was going to be a disaster for Labour because Jeremy Corbyn is not popular. There was the questions of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that has not been addressed. There are questions, and Labour failed to even deal with conservative lies. So it was a disaster from every end, and I'm surprised that it's not even worse, to be honest.
Okay, so then, Linda, let's get to the heart of it, right? These were called the Brexit elections by many. Do you think that this now magically will help the country come out of the EU in a fashion that would be good for the economy as well, preserve jobs, as well as keep the NHS intact as it currently stands, and of course better it?
I think there's an awful lot of work to do, and I don't think magic is going to come into it, quite frankly. But the way that everything is going to be set out over the next few months, obviously Boris is intent on getting the withdrawal bill through by the end of January. It's got to go through the Lords, but he is visiting the Queen today. He'll be doing a speech outside number 10. All of the MPs, the new MPs, will be sworn in on Tuesday. They're hoping to have an opening of Parliament on Thursday so that they can start to push the bill through. If everything goes through at the end of January, of course, we're on to the next stage, which is the free trade agreements with Europe. And there's going to be an awful lot of work around that. It may well be that trying to get everything done by December 2020 is going to be over-ambitious. But having said that, they did say that Boris couldn't change the withdrawal agreement in 3 months, and he did. So there's everything to play for. And of course, it's not just about the UK, but it's about Europe as well. And we've got to work together with our European partners to come up with a deal that is agreeable to both sides, where we all benefit going forward, not just for business, but for our citizens as well.
Speaking about citizens, and Patrick, there are two things that I would see that remain challenges, right? I mean, Boris Johnson claims that he's resolved, of course, the issue of the Irish backstop. I wonder what your thoughts are about that going forward as Brexit now moves forward into the final stages. And secondly, then, how Scotland has voted, with the SNP getting a majority there. Again, no surprise on the part of many people, considering Scotland voted to remain. Do you think those two can become obstacles then in the path of Boris Johnson in these final stages?
I don't think so. Firstly, we now have what I would call a rebellion-proof majority for Mr. Johnson, because even with, sort of your ERGs and people like that, the last time round, the DUP basically had a gun to the head of the government and was able to say, well, if you don't give us this or that in regards to Northern Ireland, we'll bring your government down. And that's why sort of Theresa May didn't have much room for manoeuvre. This time round, with a majority of sort of 80 plus, it appears that Mr. Johnson, he's got the largest majority of any Conservative government since 1987. So he can afford to almost lose a few MPs, which means that the DUP is far less of a threat. In addition, Nigel Dodds, who was the leader of the DUP in Parliament, lost his seat. Yeah. So the DUP have sort of suffered in this election, I think, probably as a result of their unwillingness to negotiate. So I don't think Northern Ireland is going to be a huge problem. Normally it isn't a huge problem in British politics. The reason that it was because Theresa May managed to throw away the majority that David Cameron had left her. In regards to Scotland, the SNP will continue to be a loud voice, but they can't get another referendum unless it goes through Parliament. Now, the Conservative Party in Scotland has branded itself as a unionist party. They are the opposition now in Scotland as a result. And they're not going to allow Nicola Sturgeon to have that referendum. Okay. And to be honest, the SNP don't really want another referendum because it was after the last one that they actually became a real force in the Commons. The sort of threat of a referendum is what gives them their power.
All right, so Bola, how united then is the United Kingdom right now? Because even Johnson, in the speech that he gave, I believe at 3:30 a.m. Last night, he spoke about the fact that he would want to unite the nation. He spoke about one nation. And many people have questioned what one nation exactly is referring to and what that then means because of his rhetoric in the past and because of even the rhetoric during the Brexit campaign, in fact, towards minorities and immigrants, etc. So what do you make of Scotland and all of the above and immigration?
Well, what the election has done is to put bandage temporarily on some issues, but at the same time not healed in any way the vast divisions we have in the country. You only need to travel through the country to see the level of division and the level of disunity that the country continues to face at the moment. And it's not only in the country. Even within the parties, we have different alignments within the party. What would be particularly interesting is post-Corbyn Labour Party, how that is going to pan out. There are divisions within the Labour Party that is already evident, particularly in terms of those who have sympathy to the kind of economics and politics that Corbyn has as represented in the Labour Party since 2015, and those who want to see a more progressive, more centrist Labour Party. So there are divisions everywhere. There are divisions in Labour. There are divisions in Conservative between those who want a different kind of Brexit negotiation and an exit agreement. There are divisions between the North and the South. There are divisions even within the North. So there is a sense in which this election, rather than bring people together, would probably still continue to create division. We will continue to see the kind of disunity that we've seen over the last few years. Oftentimes when I speak with young people too, in my classes, one of the things that young people are quite sad about is this feeling also that the politics of the country kind of represents ideals and values that are contrary to what they see fit. So there are divisions also there, So I don't think this election has done much in healing those divisions.
All right, so then, Linda, if we're honest, Boris Johnson has said a lot of things throughout his career which many would find unsuitable for anybody now, as current prime minister, to have said, even when he was a journalist. And we can probably go through a long list of things he said, from calling women in niqab letterboxes, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that such a man can actually unite the UK? And do you also think, as a second part of this question, that minorities, and I'm not just talking about Muslims, but minorities of all colors and races, should actually be worried under this prime minister?
I think you'll find that Boris in the past has been incredibly divisive. There's no doubt about that. But I think he is determined to bring the country together now. And with regard to racism and that sort of thing, I think that will start to calm down now. Remember, we've got an awful lot of investment that is waiting to come into this country, which will give business the huge boost that it needs, and therefore that will relate down to citizens. And with regard to the North-South divide, the investment that will come into this country will come not just out into the South, but also into the North as well. And over a period of time, I think that we will see that it will benefit the country, benefit the UK generally, and bring people together where there has been division, because we are now settled with a decision that is taking the whole country forward, everybody.
Patrick, then what of the concern about the NHS? You know that's, I mean, I've understood that's obviously a huge sensitive point for Britons. They value the NHS and the services it provides for them. Do you think that is at stake? Do you think that Johnson would genuinely put that up in a trade deal with the US?
Firstly, the NHS has never been under threat in any sort of trade deal. The question, when it was originally asked to President Trump, he was sort of caught unawares, and he sort of responded, "Oh, everything's on the table." But the NHS has never been on the table. It's not something it's often called the third rail of British politics. It's that you cannot touch it. It is almost sacrosanct.
What of that document, Patrick, that Labour candidate Jeremy Corbyn had released? Then, he released it unredacted.
Well, I think it's been proven that those documents were false. And indeed, there was sort of question about Russian meddling in this election, sort of producing sort of false documents that were put on a sort of website called Reddit. I mean, that's not how opposition leaders in the past have got documents like this. It was pretty much amateur hour from the Labour Party. There has never been a threat to the NHS, especially because Mr. Johnson has built his political career very much on investment into the NHS, with his bust during the Brexit referendum, where he said there would be $350 million a week for the NHS. In his comments this morning to party supporters, he said that his government's first priority would be the NHS. I think that the fastest way for Mr. Johnson to lose all the goodwill that he's got is to touch the NHS or to to sort of sell off parts of the NHS. It's just not going to happen.
Okay.
It's politically unfeasible for any government, regardless of their majority, to do such a thing.
Very well, Bola, I'll give you the final word. Just if you can just look back and reflect on this campaign for us, if you can. This is yet another snap election that has been held this year, of course. And as I said, this is after 100 years, an election has been held in December. Do you think it's gone the way which would be for the benefit of the country? We know that Brexit now is that much more likely to now occur upon the terms that Boris Johnson has agreed with the EU so far. Will this be a good thing? And what do you make of then the misinformation that many would argue was brought up during this campaign, and one can argue from both sides?
Well, I would disagree with you that it's from both sides. I think it's been overwhelmingly from the Tories. I think very clearly that several independent fact checkers have shown that the ads from the Tories, 90% of the ads from one report were apparently very false. So the Tories have led a campaign of all falsehood throughout this campaign, throughout the election period, from the double counting of policies, the double counting of funding towards the NHS, the 40 new hospitals that were supposed to be built or that were going to be built, and we later found out that it's from fact checking that it's only about 6 new hospitals that will be built. In fact, not 6 new hospitals, but 6 that will be refurbished of some sort, and to several other policies that the Tories have put forward. So there has been a clear attempt to completely mislead the public, and in fact, in many respects, that has also increased the need for electoral reforms, and a lot of people have been clamoring for that. But I wanted to respond to Linda's last statement about how this election will heal the divisions within the country. I think I completely disagree with that. I think this election does not heal in any way. In fact, I do not see how that would heal any part of the section of the country. Boris, as she's mentioned, is a very divisive figure. Is been known to say very, very hurtful things to migrants and to people of color within the country. And I don't see how his prime minister, his time as prime minister would be any different. So
okay, Bola, I do apologize for cutting you off. Unfortunately, the clock has gotten the best of us. I know that we have discussed about what this win for Boris Johnson means, but we of course appreciate all 3 of your time this morning. That was Bola Adadiran speaking to us from Bristol, Patrick Sullivan speaking to us from London, and from Surrey, Linda Bazant was joining us as well, giving their insight on this election win for Boris Johnson. Not a surprise, certainly. As I said, major polls before these elections showed that the Conservatives would get a resounding majority. Possibly they've gotten more of a majority than was expected. What went wrong for Labour? Was it simply about Jeremy Corbyn? Was it about a manifesto? Was it about the Brexit strategy that Labour had? God knows. We don't know specifically what it is that didn't work for the voters, but nevertheless, they voted now Conservative. The Conservatives have a majority. Now they have a responsibility to deliver on Brexit and the many other promises that Boris Johnson has made, even vis-a-vis the NHS and otherwise. Then in Scotland, we have the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, that has won a majority there. Does this mean another referendum? One of our guests said no. This will not be a referendum because, in fact, this sort of opposition situation works well for Nicola Sturgeon and her own political career at this time. We'll see, of course, whether Boris Johnson's able to deliver. Mind you, he has already delivered on the fact that he was able to change a bit of the deal that had been reached with the EU vis-a-vis Brexit. So maybe he'll be able to deliver on Brexit successfully, as well as get a new trade deal with the likes of the United States and others. We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll be back with my next segment, though, after this break.